This is the Capital Toyota Sports Ticket, presented by Advantage Heating and Air Conditioning, the only local sports talk in the Mid-Valley. Here's Jeff Morgan and Hunter Newton on 1430 KYKN, where Salem is listening.
Here on this special interview for 1430 KYKN Sports, Mike Allegre, and with a guy that if you've read the Oregon Journal, Oregonian or OregonLive.com in the last 40 years, you've seen his byline. His name is Kerry Eggers. Now Kerry retired, sort of. I think a lot of us that say we are really aren't Kerry, but Kerry joining us here because he's got a special book that's just hit the stands that he's written, one of several that he has written. But first, and it's about Jerome Kersey. We're going to jump right to that, but let's talk a little bit about your background. Gosh dang, it seems like you're still working. I see your name all the time.
That's what my friends say, Mike. You know, they said you seem like you're busier than you ever were when you were actually had a job. I didn't expect it to be this busy. The opportunity to write the book on Jerome Kersey came up, and in the meantime, I had started to develop my own website, kerryeggers.com. And so with those two things, you're right. It's been a really busy last 18 months since I retired.
You think about the metamorphosis of newspapers and how they are going away, let's be honest, and how it used to be typeset and how you used to write up a story and give somebody the copy, then it went into the computer, and now it's God knows what. You really saw a big transition in newspapers.
Mike, when I started, we would write we would type out our story and call the office and dictate word by word your story. That was for a couple. Can you imagine the time that took? Then we got a thing called a telegram, which it was a computer thing over it would type out your story, and then it would take 6 minutes per page. You could do it through the phone line, so it would cut it to 24 minutes. Now you just email it in, it's immediate. So that part of technology I really like. There's other parts that I don't like, but you're right, I've seen a tremendous change throughout 45 years.
You were there for a lot of things, but mostly a lot of Portland Trail Blazers right through the big years. After that, the Jail Blazers, other things. Did you primarily focus on the Blazers only, or did you kind of give you a wide swath there at the Oregonian?
Well, when I started the Journal, it was a lot of different things. I covered Oregon basketball, the Seahawks, a lot of high school stuff, Winterhawks for a few years, and then at the Oregonian, and I did a lot of track in the 1980s, which was a lot of fun. I covered 2 Olympics. 1989, I started on the Blazers. Actually, just covered them 3 years, Mike, for the Oregonian. The 3 years I covered them, they made the finals twice and had the best record in the league the middle year. So I got some of the greatest years they ever had with Clyde Drexler and Jerome Kersey in that group. And then, from 2000 on, when I went to the Portland Tribune, I pretty much got to cover what I wanted to cover. The Blazers were the biggest beat, and Oregon State football was the other one.
Oregon State, talk a little bit about that. You have a tie all the way back to your father, Jack. He was the sports information director there, well-known, well-loved, well-respected. I only talked to him once a long time ago. How was that growing up?
Actually, John Eggers is his name. Yeah, and it was a great place to grow up, Mike. Corvallis was a college town, and we lived and died with with Oregon State sports. I remember riding my bicycle down and watching practice and football and basketball playing in Gill Coliseum and around Parker Stadium at the time. Mike Riley was my best friend growing up, and we used to, that was our lives, really. It was a great place to grow up.
Talking with Kerry Eggers here on this special sports report on 1430 KYKN, the longtime sports journalist. They call him the Dean of Sports Writers, I know several do. When you think back on what you have covered, I can't help but go back to the Blazers because that's been a subject of several of your books, to include one of my iconic friends, Bill Schonely. You've written a book about him many, many years ago, The Voice of the Blazers. I would think that had to be one of your top things that you ever had to cover.
No question. And especially, the group that I had in the early 90s with I said, Clyde and Terry Porter and Buck Williams and Rick Adelman. And it was and Jeff Petrie was a general manager. All those people are such quality people. It was a lot of fun. And since then, I've had great relationships with most of the coaches, most of the general managers, a lot of the players, and I've got to know them on a personal level in some cases. And it's been a lot of fun.
So once you're into the Portland Tribune, you've left the Oregonian and OregonLive.com. Now you do 20 years there, strictly sports. How different was that?
It was a lot different because we were a twice-a-weekly paper and then daily online. So a lot of the stuff that, not a lot, but an increasing amount of the stuff would not even show up in the paper. The deadlines, there was really no deadlines, but you weren't timely. So you had to think differently, outside the box a little bit. More features, more column type stuff, fewer game stories, which is okay. And I became a columnist, and I got to write mostly what I wanted to write. And so I really did enjoy my time there, especially with Steve Brandon, the sports editor, and then Dwight James. The first 8 years was the editor of the paper. Yeah. So, yep.
I was going to ask you, working with Dwight. I don't know Dwight, but he just seems to be like a big fun bundle. Maybe not as big as he was, but the point is he seems like just a great guy. And you guys, to me, would have been a great 1-2 punch with Steve, making it a 1-2-3 punch.
It was a big part of the reason I decided to go over there, Mike. And he was like a big brother to me. He came at the Oregon Journal a year before me. Steve Brandon came a year after me. So the three of us were together many, many years, and we had a great time. And Dwight and I are still good friends. Steve Brandon and I talk to him all the time, and we're part of the old guard from that era.
One of the old guard, that's Kerry Eggers talking with us here today. Well, you've covered a lot of positive things, but you've had to write some tough stuff, especially from a sports angle. Give me one or two of those.
Well, one of them was the Luke Heimlich situation, the baseball pitcher at Oregon State who was accused of sexual abuse of a minor, and it's a long story, too long to cover in this interview. But that one was a very controversial one. But I got more response from that maybe than anything I've written. I tried to talk to a lot of experts about it, and I talked to their family. I think it was the only one that talked to Luke's family and talked to him about it. So that was a difficult one. There's all sorts of, the job changed a lot, Mike, from just covering the games itself to covering all the problems with the contracts, the negotiations, and legal things. And, it became a little bit, you're almost like a legal reporter in a sense the last 15 to 20 years. That's not something that I enjoy. It was just part of the job.
And, of course, covering things like the death of the subject of your latest book, I would imagine, when we all heard Jerome had passed, unexplainably, it happened. That had to hurt.
He died of a blood clot after a minor surgery, supposedly, for a meniscus tear in his knee, and the blood clot traveled to his heart, and he died of a pulmonary embolism at age 52, Mike, in 2015. This book came about. A group from Virginia reached out to me. This is right after I retired from the Tribune, and said, "Would you be interested in writing a book on Jerome?" He was from Virginia, went to a small school, Longwood College, and I said, "Well, they wanted me to continue a book that had been started by their sports information director in 1998." And I read it, and I said, "Nah, I'm not really interested in that, but I'd be interested in doing my own book if you guys have a publisher and can give me an advance." And they said, "Sure." So, a year later we had it done, and it just hit the release date was October 5th, so people should be able to get it now on kerryeggers.com or jeromekersey.net, both of our websites, or wherever books are sold.
How tough was it for you to write, and then how cathartic and how much fun was it to write?
Well, that's a good question. This is my 8th book, Mike, and this was the toughest book to write because, frankly, he's gone. The protagonist is not there. I was fortunate that the Hoke Curry, who had started the book, had done some extensive interviewing with Jerome, so I was able to get a lot of information on Jerome from that. Yeah. And I talked to 80 different other people, former teammates, coaches, players that he played against, childhood friends, college friends. It was quite a process, and I enjoyed it, and I hope that the readers will enjoy reading more about Jerome.
What did you learn about Jerome maybe you didn't already know?
Only that there was a tremendous amount of loyalty from not just, the players that he played with in the NBA, but even in college. And he just had a magical kind of charisma about him that very few people do. He was a very caring person. He made friends easily, looked you in the eye. He would talk to you and listen too. I think there's a sort of a lot of the professional athletes have a sense of entitlement. I don't think Jerome ever had that.
You're good friends with my hero, Bill Schonely. Talk a little bit about Sean's. He's over 90 now, still seen, not broadcasting, but you wrote a book about him some 20 years ago, I believe. Yep. What's he like? Is he the real deal?
Just had lunch with Sean's yesterday. In fact, I bought, which seems to usually be the case, his reputation for stinginess, Mike, is well deserved. But he's a wonderful guy. He's 92 years old now, and doing very well mentally. He's still 100% sharp, breaking down some physically, having some hip issues, and just it's harder for him to get around. He told me, he said, "Kerry, I really miss the travel, being around the guys, but I know I can't do it anymore."
What's unique about him? I mean, other than he seems to like he's pretty down to earth, not a big ego or anything like that.
He has an ego, but he's the kind of guy that treats everybody well. And I tell you, two of the best people I ever saw out in public with fans were him and Clyde Drexler. They're so nice as the way they looked at you, the way they talked at you. He's very appreciative of people. You're right. There's a certain modesty, even with the ego. There's a certain modesty about him. My brother put on a roast for me a month or so ago, and Bill narrated a 17-minute video and injected some of his humor in it. And I tell you what, at 92 years old, it's amazing. He still has the voice of God.
And you'll always remember where you were when you heard his voice when we won the title in 77. Yep. KerryEggers.com, KerryEggers, KerryEggers.com, where you can find the book, where you can read a weekly blog in less than a minute. Tell us what we can find on your website.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. Yeah, it's since I started with Dave Wilson, a Salem resident, about 18 months ago, we post regularly on it. A lot of it's about the Blazers or interviews that I've done. A lot of Oregon State stuff. I think people will enjoy reading. It's free. Just go to the homepage, put your name in the subscriber list, and you'll get emailed all the stories that we do.
We don't have enough time. We got to do another segment one day. Kerry Eggers, longtime writer, sports writer up at the Oregonian, Oregon Live, the Oregon Journal, and, of course, the Portland Tribune, and now KerryEggers.com. My friend, thank you for your time.
Very much appreciate it. Thanks, Mike.
You bet. And check for his book, his latest book on Jerome Kersey. It's out on the stands now. Again, our thanks to Kerry. More coming back here in the show. I'm Mike Allegre on 1430 KYKN Sports. Salem is listening.